They never told you this, but beneath your feet, beneath American soil, lies something far more terrifying than any Cold War secret. Nuclear weapons, buried deep underground, hidden in plain sight. For decades, ordinary citizens drove across the same highways, built homes above the same fields, and never suspected that hundreds of atomic bombs were entombed just below the surface. Sleeping, waiting, it began quietly. In the years after World War II, when the world's deadliest weapon had been unleashed twice, the US government feared one thing above all: losing control of it. So they built silos, vaults, and secret storage bunkers across the country. Some were well-known bases, but others, they never appeared on any map. And even more disturbing, many of these warheads were lost, forgotten. Some are still there. Right now, tonight, we uncover the truth. How America's own citizens became neighbors to nuclear ghosts. How government, scientists, and generals buried the most destructive weapons ever created, right under our towns, our forests, and our homes. This isn't conspiracy. It's history buried under concrete and silence. And what you'll discover will change how you see the ground beneath your feet forever. The day the earth hid fire, America's secret nuclear burial started with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the uneasy quiet that follows war. The year was 1945. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had vanished beneath mushroom clouds that reached higher than storms. The world had just witnessed the birth of fire that could end all life, and America held the match. But power like that brings fear even to those who wield it. As the Cold War dawned, the United States found itself locked in a race, not just to build more bombs, but to hide them, to protect them, to make sure no enemy and no citizen could ever find them. In remote deserts, deep forests, and beneath the plains of Kansas, secret orders began to circulate. Secure the weapons, bury them if necessary. To most Americans, the skies were calm and the farms green, but underground, men in uniforms and white radiation suits were carving out tombs of steel and concrete. At first, they called them storage sites, harmless names for horrifying things. The Nevada test site, Monzano Mountain, the Savannah River plant. Beneath these innocuous labels were vaults that could survive direct nuclear strikes, hiding warheads powerful enough to erase entire cities. And here's the secret most Americans never heard. Some weren't even military bases. Some were under industrial grounds, near small towns, even beneath schools and suburbs that would be built decades later. One witness, a former Air Force engineer, once described what he saw in the 1950s. We were told to dig, to seal, and to forget. We weren't told why, but I remember the smell of the earth. It felt like we were burying the sun. These early operations were the government's desperate attempt to create what they called fail-safe zones, areas where nuclear warheads could be hidden, maintained, or dismantled out of sight. But things didn't always go according to plan. Sometimes, they lost track. Records vanished. Serial numbers didn't match. Weapons were moved, disassembled, or temporarily buried, then abandoned when funding shifted or political winds changed. Some silos were sealed with cement and left unmarked. Others, astonishingly, were built over by later construction projects. Decades later, construction workers in rural Arkansas drilled into a forgotten chamber and found rusted warning signs reading "Restricted Area, Atomic Energy Commission." In another case, in South Carolina, radiation readings spiked near a riverbed after heavy rain. Locals thought it was runoff from an old power plant, until declassified documents hinted at a lost containment unit buried nearby. And that was just the beginning. For every known nuclear site, there were whispers of 5 more that were never officially logged. Some beneath deserts, some beneath farmland, some beneath cities whose residents will never know. The government's logic was simple. The fewer who knew, the safer the secret. But history has shown that secrets buried under soil have a way of surfacing again, because the earth never forgets. And in the decades to come, the ground itself would begin to whisper what it was hiding. Strange radiation readings, unexplained illnesses, and the occasional accidental discovery of something metallic, something sealed, something deadly. The question is, how much did the government know about these buried weapons? Were they all accounted for, or were some left behind, silent and waiting, ticking away beneath the land of the free? As the Cold War deepened, so did the tunnels, the vaults, the secrets, and by the 1960s, America was not just a nuclear superpower, it had become a nuclear graveyard. But the most chilling truth of all is what was buried there. And why? To understand that, we need to go deeper. Into the heartland, into the silos that never slept. The silos that never slept, forgotten weapons beneath the heartland. Night falls differently in the Midwest. Out here, silence stretches for miles, broken only by the hum of insects and the distant roll of thunder. But in the 1960s, beneath these calm plains of Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming, something else was alive. A hidden heartbeat beneath the soil, steel, concrete, and uranium. People called them silos. The government called them defensive deterrents. But to those who built them, they were tombs. Tombs holding the power to erase life as we know it. It began with a simple idea: bury the bomb deep enough, and it would be safe. Missile silos sprouted across the country like an underground forest of death. Towns that never appeared on any map suddenly filled with men in unmarked trucks, hauling heavy machinery at night. Locals were told it was communications work. They believed it. They had to dot in Nebraska. Farmers woke up to find their fields fenced off overnight. Government work, the signs said. By the next week, bulldozers arrived. Beneath the wheat and wild grass, crews drilled hundreds of feet down. The goal wasn't just storage, it was concealment. If an enemy ever struck, the missiles could launch before they were destroyed. But what no one said out loud was that some of those weapons would never be launched. Some were duds, some were damaged, and a few were deliberately buried and forgotten. One man who worked at a Titan II site later confessed, "We used to joke that we were standing over our own graves. One mistake, one spark, and Kansas becomes glass." And one night, it almost did. September 1980, Damascus, Arkansas. A single wrench, just a dropped socket from a maintenance crew, punctured a missile fuel tank. The leak filled the silo with deadly Technicians ran for their lives as alarms screamed. Hours later, the missile exploded. A fireball tore through the underground chamber, launching the nuclear warhead out of the silo. It landed, intact, in a ditch nearby. The government called it a miracle. But off the record, engineers whispered it was a warning, proof that their buried gods of war could awaken without notice. After Damascus, officials scrambled. Some sites were quietly dismantled, others were sealed and decommissioned. But decommissioned didn't always mean destroyed. It often meant buried again, reclassified, and erased from public record. By the late 1980s, hundreds of silos dotted the interior of the country. Some were so deep they hit groundwater. Others were so poorly sealed that water leaked inside, corroding steel and leaking chemicals into the soil. The government called it manageable contamination. Locals called it poisoned wells. And still, the silos remained. Years later, long after the Cold War ended, real estate developers stumbled across one such site near an abandoned Air Force station. When they lowered a camera into a cracked concrete shaft, they didn't find empty space. They found barrels, dozens of them, marked with fading radiation symbols and government serial codes from the 1960s. No one ever confirmed what was inside. The footage was seized within days. The site was declared restricted, then quietly purchased by a federal contractor. The official statement said it was environmental cleanup. The workers who went in called it something else. Recovery. It's here that the story takes a strange turn. Not all buried weapons were meant to stay hidden forever. In the 1970s, a classified project codenamed Operation Safe Haven allegedly involved repurposing old silos for emergency storage. But declassified fragments hinted something more: references to non-standard payloads, contaminated casings, and deep storage at inactive facilities. In plain English, some believe the US hid nuclear material not just for defense, but to avoid exposure from failed experiments, weapons too unstable to dismantle safely. Instead of destroying them, they buried them and built over them. Imagine it, a small-town fairground in the Midwest. Families laughing under fireworks, never realizing that a few hundred feet below, in rusting vaults, lay the remains of test warheads from a program no one was ever supposed to know about. And it wasn't only America. Across the world, the Soviets did the same. But in the US, secrecy became survival. Any discovery could spark panic, or worse, lawsuits from generations living unknowingly above radioactive ground. One geologist who studied Cold War waste sites said something chilling. Sometimes we'd find strange anomalies on radiation scans, clusters that shouldn't exist. The reports would vanish from our archives the next morning. It was like the Earth was trying to tell us something the government didn't want us to hear. The strange part, many of those hotspots matched locations of retired missile fields. Coincidence, or buried evidence? By the time the 1990s rolled around, a new generation had moved into homes built over forgotten bunkers. Kids rode bikes across patches of land once considered top secret. Farmers plowed fields that still hummed faintly with radiation. And beneath it all, the silos, these sleeping giants, sat in silence, waiting. But silence has weight. It bends history. It warps memory. In 2002, a construction crew outside Cheyenne, Wyoming, unearthed a thick steel hatch. When they forced it open, the Geiger counters screamed. Within days, the site was sealed off. The official report mentioned legacy contamination from Cold War activity. The unofficial rumor said the workers saw something they weren't supposed to see, a warhead casing, intact and unmarked. Those men never spoke publicly again, and that's when people began asking the question no one wanted to answer. How many of these things are still down there? Government agencies released partial data, all known weapons accounted for. They said, but internal memos from declassified archives tell a different story. Entries about materials, lost inventory, and potentially misclassified units. The numbers never quite add up. Some say the count was off by only a handful. Others whisper it could be hundreds. So where are they now? Are they buried under old bases, abandoned mines, or deep within the forested hills of Appalachia? Maybe all of the above, maybe none. What's certain is this: beneath the calm heartland of America, the ghosts of the nuclear age still breathe, slow, silent, invisible, and one day, one may awaken. Because history doesn't bury its weapons forever. It buries them long enough for us to forget. But forgetting comes with a price, and in the next chapter, that price will surface in the form of deadly accidents, denials, and the people who dared to uncover what should have stayed hidden. Accidents, cover-ups, and radioactive lies. It began, as it always does, with a rumor, a faint hum beneath the soil, a strange sickness in a small town, a story the government insisted was nothing more than coincidence. In the early 1990s, after the Cold War's end, America was ready to exhale. The Soviet Union had collapsed, the threat of nuclear war seemed to fade, and the world moved on. But not everyone felt safe. Across rural America, farmers and families started reporting strange phenomena: metallic odors in the air after rain, wells that glowed faintly under ultraviolet light, livestock dying without explanation. In West Texas, a rancher named Harold Pierce noticed his cattle refusing to graze near an old concrete mound that had been there since his grandfather's time. He joked that it was a government tomb. One evening, a storm rolled across the plains. Lightning struck the mound directly. The next day, a wide circle of scorched earth spread from the spot. Days later, Harold's dog died. When he brought the body to a local vet, the Geiger counter snapped to life. Officials arrived within hours. They took soil samples, confiscated the vet's equipment, and handed Harold a letter stamped National Environmental Response. The letter warned him not to discuss the incident, for his own safety. Within a week, the concrete mound was gone, replaced by leveled earth and a new barbed fence. Harold never saw those officials again. What no one told him was that his land sat above a temporary containment site used by the Atomic Energy Commission in the 1950s. It wasn't supposed to leak. It wasn't even supposed to exist anymore. But like so many buried weapons, it had been forgotten until nature itself decided to dig it up. And Harold wasn't the only one. Across the country, similar events began to surface: quiet emergencies that never made the news. In Pennsylvania, construction workers unearthed metallic drums leaking a strange green residue. In Idaho, a small river turned orange overnight, traced back to an unidentified underground structure. In Colorado, school children fell sick after playing on a hill later discovered to contain remnants of a dismantled missile silo. Each time, the response was the same: silence. Cleanup teams arrived, the press was kept away, and within days, the ground was paved, fenced, or forgotten. But behind the curtain, something darker was brewing. A former Department of Energy whistleblower, known only as Carter, came forward in 1999. His testimony shook those few who dared to listen. He claimed that throughout the 1960s and 70s, the U.S. had buried nuclear components in sealed containers as part of an emergency disposal plan called Project Cloudcap. When storage facilities overflowed or became unstable, The materials were quietly relocated, often to rural land under federal lease. The containers, he said, were supposed to last 100 years, but many were already corroding after 40. Some of them weren't sealed right, he said in a taped interview. You bury metal, it rusts. You bury death, it seeps. Carter disappeared months later. His car was found abandoned on a mountain road in Oregon. The investigation ended quietly, citing no evidence of foul play. And yet, his claims matched classified memos later, uncovered through the Freedom of Information Act documents detailing loss of containment, radiation, irregularities, and civilian exposure. Mitigation, phrases so vague they almost meant nothing, yet terrifyingly specific to those who understood what was really being hidden. By the early 2000s, the truth began bleeding through. Satellite imagery showed strange restricted zones appearing overnight. Farmers reported black unmarked helicopters hovering low over isolated areas. Local newspapers tried to investigate and were swiftly silenced by sudden national security injunctions. But some stories couldn't be erased. In 2003, in a small town in Montana, a high school student named Claire Monroe found something while hiking with friends near an abandoned bunker, a small, metallic cylinder sticking out of the dirt, about the size of a soda can, with the faded symbol of radiation scratched across its side. They thought it was junk. She took it home. 2 days later, she was hospitalized with severe radiation burns. Federal agents arrived before doctors even diagnosed her. The hospital wing was sealed. Reporters who showed up were escorted out. Claire survived, but she never returned to that town. Her family relocated under a federal relocation program. The bunker where she found the object. It was filled in with gravel by the end of the week, and yet, someone had left a message scratched into the bunker's concrete before it vanished. 3 words, carved deep, "They're still here." That phrase began circulating online, spawning conspiracies, debates, and amateur investigations. Most were dismissed as internet hysteria, but one group of researchers traced the coordinates of old missile fields against modern contamination reports. The overlap was undeniable. Counties with decommissioned silos showed radiation levels far above baseline, and though the government dismissed them as harmless legacy readings, the numbers told another story, a silent spread of contamination beneath the heart of the nation. Then came the explosion. Hanford Site, Washington State. Officially, it was a chemical reaction incident at an old nuclear waste tank. Unofficially, it was something else. Workers described a deep tremor moments before the blast, as though something underground gave way. When the dust settled, readings spiked far beyond expected levels. One responder later admitted in a leaked report that the radiation signatures didn't match the site's inventory. "Whatever blew up down there," he wrote, "wasn't supposed to be there." The government blamed aging infrastructure, but quietly increased funding for subsurface reclamation, a phrase few had ever heard before. When journalists asked what it meant, they were told it referred to ground restoration. But insiders knew the real meaning, digging up what was never supposed to be buried. Across the country, the pattern repeated, strange cleanups under vague environmental programs, always in areas connected to Cold War silos or testing grounds. Residents noticed men in hazmat suits working at night, trucks hauling sealed containers before dawn. One night, in rural Nevada, a truck overturned on a dirt road. Locals who rushed to help saw a container split open. Inside, not waste, not soil, but a metallic sphere the size of a beach ball, gleaming silver, humming faintly. Within hours, the area was locked down by the National Guard. The next morning, there was no trace of the crash, no wreck, no vehicles, no record, just scorched ground and silence. The old buried weapons were waking. Every new incident raised a question the government refused to answer. If these devices were dismantled, why were so many still being found intact? Why were so many sealed sites quietly reclassified and fenced again? Was it cleanup or containment? And beneath all these cover-ups, one truth began to take shape. Some of the weapons weren't abandoned. They were left on purpose. To this day, no official agency admits to the existence of Project Cloudcap, or to the missing materials Carter described. But the accidents keep happening. The restricted zones keep expanding, and the soil, the same soil Americans walk, farm, and build homes upon, continues to whisper warnings. Because if these weapons were buried once, they can be buried again, and the deeper question is no longer where they are, but why they were left behind. Some say the weapons are too unstable to move. Others believe they serve a darker purpose, a secret fallback arsenal, meant to be reactivated only in the nation's final hour. Whatever the truth is, it's still buried, waiting. And in the next part of this story, that truth begins to rise from the ground in places where no one dares to dig. The ghost base is what's still buried beneath US soil today. The desert doesn't lie. It just keeps its secrets until the wind decides to speak. In 2017, deep in the Nevada wilderness, a group of urban explorers stumbled upon what they thought was an abandoned Cold War bunker, a slab of concrete half swallowed by sand, a faded no trespassing sign, and a faint metallic hum coming from somewhere below. When they pried open the rusted hatch, a breath of cold, sterile air escaped, air that hadn't touched daylight in decades. Their flashlights cut through darkness and dust. Concrete corridors stretched endlessly. Then they saw the markings on the walls, faded stencils reading AEC property, restricted access. The Atomic Energy Commission, the same agency that once handled the nation's nuclear arsenal. The footage they uploaded that night vanished within 24 hours. But for a few hours, it was online. Thousands saw it. The echoing halls, the sealed steel doors, the faint outline of a symbol, radiation warning scorched into a wall. The video ended abruptly, with a sound like metal grinding. The explorers were never identified. Days later, satellite imagery showed something strange. The coordinates where the hatch had been now displayed a perfectly circular patch of newly leveled sand, as if the ground had been replaced. It wasn't the first ghost base to surface. Across America, old silos and secret bunkers keep being discovered, and then quietly erased again. In the forests of Washington, a logging crew uncovered what looked like a concrete ring protruding from the soil. When they reported it, officials from the Department of Energy appeared by dawn. The area was fenced off before the loggers even packed up their tools. Within a week, the ring was gone. In North Dakota, beneath a disused grain elevator, a farmer found what looked like a buried hatch. When he tried to dig it up, men in black SUVs arrived, warning him that the site contained dangerous chemicals. Later found a small device embedded in the soil. Nearby, a radiation dosimeter from the 1950s. The government insists these are routine cleanups. But old workers, those who were there when the silos were built, tell another story. They speak of tunnels that stretch for miles, connecting bases that were never listed on maps. They say some were built not just for missiles, but for storage. Storage of things they were told not to ask about. One retired engineer named Paul Jennings described one of these sites in detail before he died. He said it was under a mountain in Colorado. We called it the Vault, he said. We built it to last forever. Triple reinforced doors. What we stored there wasn't meant to be used. It was meant to be forgotten. When asked what it was, he went silent. Then, almost whispering, he said, if we moved it, we might wake it. After his death, his personal notebooks were seized by federal authorities. His family never got them back. The phrase "waking it" kept appearing in declassified documents over the years. Cryptic notes from 1970s, nuclear oversight reports, describing reactivity fluctuations in dormant materials. Experts say it's impossible. Nuclear material doesn't wake. But these same reports mention thermal inconsistencies, seismic anomalies, and containment stress points. Technical phrases for one simple truth. Something underground was changing. End. Then there are the maps. Satellite overlays of America's decommissioned missile fields show subtle but consistent energy readings, small, pulsing heat signatures in regions that should be cold, like faint heartbeats beneath the earth. Some scientists believe they're remnants of decaying systems, electrical surges from forgotten equipment, but others aren't so sure. One physicist, Dr. Elaine Porter, once told a reporter that she believed certain silos were never deactivated at all. It's like they were left on standby, she said, waiting for a signal that never came. 2 weeks after that interview aired, Dr. Porter resigned from her research position and disappeared from public record. Every generation, another layer of this buried history surfaces, and with it, questions that no one seems eager to answer. What if some of those buried devices weren't accidents? What if, buried across vast regions, they formed a hidden network, a strategic reserve, meant to be used only when all else failed? Old military blueprints recovered from Cold War archives hint at something called Operation Deep Fence, a last resort defensive system using subterranean nuclear devices to deter invasion or obliterate advancing forces. The concept was supposedly abandoned, but fragments of the project's schematics were found, and they matched known silo coordinates. If that's true, then America isn't just a country sitting on forgotten bombs. It's sitting on a sleeping defense grid, one designed to destroy the land it's meant to protect. And that's the part no one talks about, because if these weapons still exist, then every attempt to remove or disturb them risks catastrophe. They're not just relics of war. They're traps designed by men who believed the end of the world could be controlled with engineering and silence. In 2019, seismic sensors in Nevada recorded a minor quake near an area with no known fault lines. Within hours, nearby residents reported strange lights in the night sky, a glow on the horizon, followed by a low, distant rumble that shook windows. The government called it a meteorological anomaly, but radiation levels in the area spiked briefly, then fell again. No one ever explained how weather could cause radiation. And yet, even with these clues, the maps, the leaks, the silos rediscovered and resealed, most Americans live unaware, never realizing that the land beneath them hides the remnants of a hidden war, a war that never officially ended. At night, truck convoys still crossed the country, unmarked, escorted by vehicles without plates. They moved through back roads, never stopping, always at the same hours between midnight and 3. Witnesses describe low droning sounds, like generators buried underground. Some say they're moving waste. Others believe they're maintaining something. Whatever they're doing, it's still happening. And here's the haunting truth: none of the agencies involved will confirm or deny whether every nuclear device from the Cold War era was recovered. Their official stance remains carefully worded. All active and known weapons systems are accounted for. Known, not all, just the ones they admit existed. The ghost bases remain, the sealed doors under forests, the buried vaults in deserts, the faint heat signatures that pulse like forgotten heartbeats under American soil. And if even one of them still houses a live warhead, then the land itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone to dig too deep, or lightning to strike twice. History may have buried these weapons, but the earth remembers. And soon, something will force it to reveal what it's been hiding all along. The fallout of silence when secrets outlived the soldiers who kept them there. Man who finally decided to talk was dying. He was 91, frail, his voice barely more than a rasp. But when the reporter asked if the rumors were true, if America had truly buried live nuclear weapons beneath its own soil, his eyes flared with something fierce. Not fear, guilt. "We didn't bury bombs," he said. "We buried mistakes." His name was Colonel Raymond Ellis, retired Air Force. In his youth, he had overseen the closure of several Titan missile silos during the early 1970s. Officially, those sites were dismantled, their payloads removed, their structures sealed forever. But Ellis remembered something different. Orders that came from above classification. Teams that arrived unannounced. Materials offloaded in the middle of the night. Sealed into the ground under reinforced concrete. Never logged again. He said one word before his nurse called the interview to an end. Red Haven. That name, until then, appeared in no record. But when the reporter searched it later, she found a declassified memo from 1962, referencing Red Haven Containment Facility, Montana. The coordinates were blacked out. The project description read only, subsurface asset relocation, and then, nothing. Weeks later, the reporter's apartment was broken into. Her computer was gone. Her notes, gone. Colonel Ellis passed away 2 days after. Official cause, natural causes. His family said his personal belongings were taken by men claiming to represent federal archives. The story was almost lost again. Almost. But history, like radiation, has a way of leaking through cracks. In 2021, a massive wildfire tore through Montana. It burned through miles of uninhabited land, including a remote valley near the site of an abandoned radar installation. When firefighters arrived, their radiation alarms triggered. They thought it was equipment failure until one of the men collapsed. The following day, the area was evacuated. Local authorities released a statement blaming legacy waste contamination. But satellite photos captured something strange before the smoke cleared. A large crater, perfectly circular, surrounded by scorched trees. In the center, half buried, was a shape that didn't belong. A metallic dome, reflecting the firelight like an eye staring out of the earth. The image went viral before it was scrubbed. Some said it was an old storage tank, others, a missile head cap. The truth was buried again, literally. Within a week, new soil covered the crater. Within a month, a new fence surrounded the area. Environmental Rehabilitation Zone, the sign read. But the name Red Haven started circulating again. Whispers in online forums. Anonymous posts from supposed ex-military engineers. Some said Red Haven wasn't just one site, it was a network. A last resort grid, stretching across several states. Built in the panic of the early nuclear age, when America feared annihilation every second. A system not meant for attack, but for silence. Each buried device, they claimed, wasn't a weapon, but a failsafe. If the nation ever fell, or if command centers were destroyed, these buried cores would ensure nothing was left for an enemy to claim. A scorched earth policy, automated, sealed, forgotten. But what happens when you forget the password to your own doomsday? In the years after Ellis's death, more strange reports surfaced. Geothermal readings that spiked for no reason. Seismic data that showed synchronized pulses in areas far from fault lines. Experts blamed underground gas pockets or decaying radar systems. But one geophysicist studying the data noticed something chilling. The pulse intervals matched. Cold War launch signal frequencies. As if something underground was listening. She published her findings anonymously, using the pseudonym Helios. Her final message read, "They buried machines designed to respond to orders. What if they still can?" Then she vanished. There's a story, never verified, never denied, about a midnight test near Red Haven in 2023. Locals claimed the ground shook, though there were no earthquakes recorded. A faint orange glow appeared on the horizon, followed by a low rumble that lasted several minutes, then silence. The next morning, soldiers in hazmat suits arrived, and the road leading north was blocked by armored vehicles. No media coverage followed, but one local drone pilot caught a frame before his feed was jammed. A massive, circular steel hatch half open, smoke rising from it, and something glowing deep below, pulsing red. No one knows what was inside. It's easy to dismiss these stories as paranoia. Easier still to believe the official version that every bomb was dismantled, every warhead accounted for. But the pattern is too consistent, the cover-ups too coordinated. And if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the most dangerous secrets are the ones no one admits still exist. The buried weapons were meant to protect the nation, but now, they protect only the lie. Families who once worked those bases are dying off, taking memories to their graves. The new generation builds homes over forgotten vaults, drives highways above sealed bunkers, walks dogs in fields that hum faintly at night. And the few who still remember the truth, the scientists, the soldiers, the engineers, are fading away, one by one. Yet, before each of them dies, they all seem to say the same thing: it's not over. Because maybe it ISN single quotes, maybe the silos that never slept are still listening, still waiting for the signal that was never cancelled. Maybe the buried hearts of those forgotten weapons, corroded, unstable, dreaming in their steel coffins, still remember the language of war. And maybe, someday soon, when the right vibration trembles through the earth, one of them might answer. No one knows where, no one knows when, but the earth will. It always does. And when it speaks again, it won't whisper, it will roar.